They were married for 47 years, raised 4 children, sacrificed everything, and when they needed help most, their own family gave them 48 hours to disappear. Cast out, broke, and forgotten, Harlan and Nell took shelter in a half-buried cabin in the Montana wilderness that no one had touched in decades. But beneath the rotting floorboards, they found something that would change everything. A secret worth $295 million and a chance to rewrite the ending everyone thought was already written. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The first crack in their world came on a Sunday. Harlan sat at the head of the dining table he'd built with his own hands 30 years ago, the wood still smooth, still solid, still holding the weight of too many memories. Nell stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel clutched in her fingers like a lifeline, watching her 4 children sit around that table with expressions she didn't recognize. Their oldest son, Garrett, cleared his throat. He was 43 now, a sales manager with a mortgage and 2 kids in private school. He wore a polo shirt tucked into khakis like he was attending a business meeting, not visiting his parents. "Mom, Dad," he started, then paused. His wife, Stacy, nudged him with her elbow. "We need to talk about your situation." Harlan's hand tightened around his coffee mug. 72 years old, shoulders still broad from decades of carpentry work, but his knuckles ached now. Everything ached. "What situation?" Nell asked softly. She was 68, her hair silver and pulled back in a bun, her apron still dusted with flour from the biscuits she'd made that morning. Biscuits none of them had touched. Their daughter, Margot, spoke next. 39, a dental hygienist, always the practical one. "You can't keep living like this. The house is falling apart. Dad's pension barely covers utilities. You're drowning." Harlan felt something cold settle in his chest. "We're managing." "You're not," their youngest son, Owen, cut in. 28, fresh off a promotion at a tech startup, wearing designer sneakers that probably cost more than Harlan's monthly grocery budget. "We've talked about this. You need to be in a facility, somewhere with medical staff, meal plans, activities." "A home," Nell whispered. The words felt like glass in her throat. "An assisted living community," Garrett corrected, as if the new label made it any gentler. Their second daughter, Ruby, hadn't said anything yet. She sat at the far end of the table, arms crossed, jaw tight. 35, a middle school teacher, the one who used to call every week. Used to. "Ruby?" Nell's voice cracked. "You agree with this?" Ruby finally looked up. Her eyes were hard. "Mum, I can't keep doing this. None of us can. Every time we turn around it's something. Your furnace broke. Dad fell off a ladder. Your car died. We all have our own families, our own problems." "We never asked you for anything," Harlan said quietly. "You didn't have to ask," Garrett snapped. "We've been paying your property taxes for 2 years. Owen covered your hospital bills last winter. Margot bought you a new refrigerator. Ruby's been sending you money every month." The room went silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock, another relic from better days. Nell's hands trembled. She thought about all the nights she'd stayed up sewing Garrett's Halloween costumes by hand, the way she'd worked double shifts as a waitress so Margot could have braces, the college fund she and Harlan had emptied so Owen could go to that expensive school he'd wanted, the weekends she'd babysat Ruby's kids for free while Ruby worked on her master's degree. She thought about Harlan building each of their children a toy chest that still sat in their childhood bedrooms upstairs. The way he'd taught Garrett to swing a hammer, helped Margot rebuild an engine, coached Owen's little league team, and walked Ruby down the aisle at her wedding. "We gave you everything," Nell whispered. "And we're grateful," Stacy said in that smooth, rehearsed voice that meant she'd practiced this. "But you can't live on gratitude. The house needs a new roof. The plumbing is shot. The foundation is cracking. It would cost more to fix than it's worth." Harlan's jaw clenched. "This is our home." It's a money pit, Owen said. Look, we found a place. Pine Meadows Senior Living. It's nice, clean. They have bingo on Thursdays. We've already spoken to a realtor, Margot added. The house should sell quickly. The land alone is worth something. After we settle your debts and pay off what you owe us, there should be enough to cover your first year at Pine Meadows. Nell's vision blurred. You're selling our house. It's not your house anymore, Garrett said flatly. Not really. We're the ones keeping it afloat. The words hit like a fist. Nell reached for the counter to steady herself. Harlan stood up slowly, chair scraping against hardwood. Get out, he said, voice low and dangerous. Dad, don't be dramatic, Ruby sighed. Get out! We're trying to help you, Owen insisted. Harlan's voice rose, shaking with fury and heartbreak. You're trying to erase us, shove us in a box so you don't have to feel guilty anymore. Well, I won't go. This is my house. I built half of it with my own hands. Your mother planted every flower in that garden. We raised you here, loved you here. And now it's time to let it go, Margot said coldly. We've made our decision. You can't just decide our lives for us, Nell said, tears streaming down her face. Garrett pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. The realtor comes on Tuesday to take photos. The listing goes live on Thursday. You have 48 hours to pack what you want to keep. The rest will be donated or trashed. You can't do this, Harlan choked out. We already have, Garrett stood, buttoning his jacket. Pine Meadows has a room ready for you. They're expecting you on Friday. If you don't show up, we'll have to make other arrangements. What other arrangements? Nell asked, terrified. No one answered. One by one their children stood. Owen paused, looked like he might say something, then just shook his head and walked out. Margot followed. Ruby stopped at the door, glanced back. I'm sorry, she whispered, but she still left. Garrett was last. This is for your own good. You'll see that eventually. The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot. Harlan and Nell stood in their kitchen, in the home they'd built together, surrounded by 47 years of memories, and felt more alone than they'd ever been in their lives. Nell moved first. She walked to the window and watched the cars pull away one by one, brake lights disappearing down the long gravel driveway. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, an old woman she barely recognized. Harlan, she said softly, what are we going to do? He didn't answer. He was staring at the folder on the table like it was a snake coiled to strike. Finally, he picked it up, opened it. Inside were real estate listings, brochures for Pine Meadows with smiling elderly people playing cards and tending gardens that didn't look real, and a letter from a lawyer he'd never met outlining the transfer of property assets. His hands shook as he read, legal jargon, cold, clinical language that reduced their entire life to square footage and market value. They can't do this, he said again, but his voice held no conviction. Nell turned from the window. Can't they? The question hung in the air. Harlan knew the answer. Their names were on the deed, but their children held the power. They'd been paying the bills, covering the gaps, keeping the lights on. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of anyone looking from the outside, Garrett and the others were right. Two elderly people barely scraping by, holding on to a crumbling house they couldn't afford to maintain. We could fight it, Harlan said weakly. With what? Nell asked. We don't have money for a lawyer. We don't have money for anything. She walked to the table, sank into her chair, the same chair she'd sat in for 3 decades, the same spot where she'd fed babies, helped with homework, celebrated birthdays, and held countless family dinners that used to end in laughter. How did we get here? She whispered. Harlan sat down beside her, took her hand. His palm was rough, scarred from years of construction work. Her fingers were thin, joints swollen with arthritis. We got old, he said simply, and we became inconvenient. They sat in silence as the afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The house settled and creaked around them, familiar sounds that had always meant safety, comfort, home. Nell thought about Pine Meadows, the sterile rooms, the scheduled activities, the nurses who would call her sweetie and talk to her like a child, the loss of everything that made her feel like herself. "I won't go," she said suddenly. Harlan looked at her. "Nell, I won't," her voice strengthened. "I'd rather die than let them put us away like broken furniture." "Then what do we do?" She met his eyes. "We leave." "Leave? Where would we go?" "Anywhere. Nowhere. I don't care." Tears spilled down her cheeks again. "But I won't sit here and let them sell our life out from under us, and I won't go to that place and pretend to be grateful while our children cash checks and tell themselves they did the right thing." Harlan was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. "Okay," he said. "We leave." They spent that night packing. Not everything, just what mattered. Nell filled a suitcase with clothes, photo albums, her mother's jewelry, and the quilt her grandmother had made. Harlan loaded his tools into the bed of their ancient pickup truck, a 1986 Ford that had more rust than paint but still ran. They moved through the house like ghosts, touching walls, pausing in doorways, saying goodbye to rooms that had witnessed their entire marriage. The bedroom where they'd made love and made plans. The nursery that had held 4 cribs at different times. The living room where Harlan had taught each child to ride a bike by pushing them around in circles on rainy days. Nell stood in the kitchen one last time, hand on the counter she'd rolled 10,000 pie crusts on. She thought about Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, ordinary Wednesdays that hadn't felt special until now. "I'm ready," she lied. They loaded the truck in darkness. Harlan left the folder on the table with a note that said only, "You can have the house, you can't have us." At 4 a.m, with frost coating the windows and their breath fogging in the cold air, Harlan turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught. Nell didn't look back as they rolled down the driveway. She couldn't. If she looked back, she might not be able to leave. They drove east, toward the mountains, with no destination and $347 to their names. The Montana landscape stretched endlessly before them, all rolling hills and distant peaks touched with early snow. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that would have been beautiful if Nell's heart wasn't breaking. Harlan drove in silence, both hands on the wheel, jaw set. Nell watched the scenery blur past, small towns and gas stations, farms and forests. They stopped once for coffee at a diner where the waitress looked at them with pity, like she could see the desperation rolling off them in waves. "Where are we headed?" the waitress asked, topping off Harlan's cup. "Don't know yet," he answered honestly. She nodded, like that made perfect sense. "Well, good luck to you both." They drove for 6 hours before the truck started making a sound that meant trouble. Harlan pulled over at a scenic overlook, popped the hood, and stared at the engine like it might explain itself. "How bad?" Nell asked. "Bad enough." He wiped his hands on a rag. "She's got maybe another 50 miles in her if we're lucky." Nell looked around. They were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pine trees and mountain air so clean it hurt to breathe. A small town sign in the distance read, "Welcome to Pine Haven, population 412. "Maybe we can find a mechanic," she said, without much hope. They limped into Pine Haven as the sun reached its peak. The town was small, the kind of place with one main street, a post office that doubled as a general store, and a diner with a faded sign that read Millie's. Harlan parked in front of a garage that looked like it hadn't seen business in years. A man in coveralls emerged, wiping grease from his hands. "Help you folks?" "Truck's dying," Harlan said. "Need to know if it's worth fixing." The man looked under the hood for about 30 seconds. "Depends on what you mean by worth. I can patch her up for about $200. But she's old. Won't last much longer no matter what I do. $200, more than half of what they had left. Do it, Harlan said. Take me till tomorrow morning. Harlan nodded. He and Nell grabbed their bags and walked into town, looking for somewhere, anywhere they could afford to stay for one night. The motel wanted $80. They had $147 left after the truck repair. Nell did the math in her head. $80 for the room left $67 for food, gas, and the rest of their lives. We'll sleep in the truck, she said quietly. Nell, we need that money, Harlan. We can sleep in the truck. They bought sandwiches at the general store for $6 and ate them on a bench outside the post office. An elderly woman sat beside them, feeding pigeons from a paper bag. You folks just passing through? She asked. Something like that, Nell replied. The woman studied them with sharp blue eyes. Running from something or towards something? Nell's throat tightened. I don't know anymore. The woman nodded slowly. My name's Constance. Been in Pine Haven 60 years. It's not much, but it's home. She paused. There's a property about 8 miles north of here. Old logging road. Cabin's been abandoned since the 70s. Belonged to a man who just up and vanished one day. Nobody's touched it since. Why are you telling us this? Harlan asked. Constance shrugged. Because you look like people who need a place to land, and that cabin's just sitting there waiting for someone to give it purpose again. She stood, brushed crumbs from her lap. Can't promise it's livable, but it's something. She walked away before they could respond. Harlan and Nell sat in silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. We should at least look, Nell said finally. The next morning, with their patched-up truck and detailed directions from Constance, they found the logging road. It was overgrown, barely visible, more of a suggestion than an actual path. Harlan drove slowly, branches scraping against the sides of the truck. 3 miles in, they saw it. The cabin was half buried in the hillside, like the earth had tried to swallow it whole. The roof was covered in moss and wildflowers, vines crawled up the walls, windows were dark and intact somehow. The whole structure leaned slightly to the left, but it was still standing. Harlan parked, and they got out slowly, staring at what might become their last option. It's not much, he said. It's more than we have, Nell replied. They approached carefully. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Harlan pushed it open with a creak that sounded like a sigh of relief, like the cabin had been holding its breath for decades, waiting for someone to come home. Inside was dim and dusty, but surprisingly dry. The main room had a stone fireplace, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a small kitchen area with an old cast-iron stove. A doorway led to what looked like a bedroom. Nell walked through slowly, hand trailing along the walls. The floor was solid beneath her feet. The ceiling had some water damage, but no holes. It smelled like earth and time, but not rot. Harlan, she called out, come look at this. She was standing in the bedroom, pointing to the walls. They were reinforced with extra beams, over-engineered for such a small structure. The windows had heavy shutters on the inside. Whoever built this, Harlan murmured, running his hand along the beams. They built it to last, and to hide. They spent the rest of the day exploring. There was a root cellar, empty but functional, a well outside that still had water, solar panels on the roof, old but potentially viable if Harlan could figure out how to restore them. As the sun began to set, they stood outside the cabin, exhausted, filthy, and facing an impossible decision. We can't stay here, Nell said without conviction. We can't stay anywhere else, Harlan replied. Nell thought about their children. By now, they would have discovered the empty house, the note, the vanished parents. She wondered if they were worried or just annoyed that their plans had been disrupted. She thought about Pine Meadows with its scheduled activities and fake gardens. Then she looked at the cabin, half buried in Montana wilderness, forgotten by the world. We'll freeze when winter comes, she said. Probably, Harlan agreed. We barely have any money. True. This is crazy. Yep. Nell turned to face him. In the fading light, she could see every line on his face, every grey hair, every mark of their 47 years together. He looked tired. He looked scared. But he also looked like he was still willing to fight. I choose this, she said firmly. I choose us here trying to survive on our own terms, over dying slowly in a place that would steal everything we are. Harlan pulled her close. Then we stay. They spent that first night on the floor of the cabin, wrapped in blankets from the truck, listening to the forest settle around them. Nell cried quietly, mourning everything they'd lost. Harlan held her, his own tears silent but no less real. But when morning came, when light filtered through the dusty windows and birds sang in the trees outside, they got up. They got to work. Harlan began with the roof, patching holes with materials scavenged from the forest and their limited supplies. Nell cleaned, scrubbing decades of dust and cobwebs, making the small space feel less like a tomb and more like a home. They had no electricity yet, no running water inside, no heat except what they could coax from the fireplace. They rationed their food, eating once a day, making every dollar stretch. It was the hardest thing they'd ever done. It was also the freest they'd felt in years. Because here, in this forgotten cabin buried in the Montana hills, nobody told them they were too old, too much trouble, too expensive to love. Here, they were just Harlan and Nell, two people who had chosen each other 47 years ago and were choosing each other still. And deep beneath their feet, buried under decades of dirt and secret history, a fortune waited in the darkness. But they didn't know that yet. 2 weeks passed like a blur of bruised knuckles and aching backs. Harlan and Nell fell into a rhythm born of necessity and stubbornness. They woke with the sun because they had no choice. Candles and flashlights were precious resources that couldn't be wasted on morning routines. Harlan spent his days on the roof, reinforcing beams that had somehow survived 4 decades of Montana winters. His carpenter's eye caught things others would have missed. The craftsmanship was exceptional, far beyond what a simple wilderness cabin required. Whoever built this place had known what they were doing and had spared no expense. Nell worked inside, transforming dust and abandonment into something that resembled a home. She scrubbed the cast-iron stove until it gleamed, cleared the chimney, and got a fire going that filled the small space with warmth for the first time in decades. She hung their clothes on nails Harlan drove into the walls. She arranged their few possessions on the wooden table like they were treasures. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and didn't talk about their children. That wound was too fresh, too deep. Instead, they talked about small victories. Harlan getting the well pump working, Nell finding wild mushrooms that were safe to eat. The way the sunset looked through the bedroom window. They were surviving. Barely, but surviving. On the 16th day, Nell walked into Pine Haven. The 3-mile trek took her over an hour, her knees protesting every step, but they needed supplies. She had $42 left and a list of essentials that would cost at least $60. The general store was small, cramped, and smelled like coffee and old wood. The woman behind the counter looked up as Nell entered, and her face broke into a warm smile. "You must be one of the folks Constance told me about," she said. "I'm Ruby May. Welcome to Pine Haven." Nell blinked, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you. I need some supplies, but I'm a bit short on funds. I was wondering if you might need help around the store. I could work for credit." Ruby May studied her for a moment. "What kind of work can you do?" "I was a waitress for 30 years. I can clean, organize, help customers, whatever you need." Ruby May nodded slowly. "Tell you what, you come in 3 days a week, 4 hours each day, and I'll pay you $8 an hour. That's $96 a week. You can take what you need now, and we'll call it an advance." Nell's eyes filled with tears. "You don't even know me." I know Constance sent you. That's enough. Ruby May began pulling items from the shelves. Besides, I could use the help. My arthritis has been acting up something fierce. Nell left the store with 2 bags of groceries, a part-time job, and the first spark of hope she'd felt since her children had cast them out. When she got back to the cabin, Harlan was in the bedroom, staring at the wall with his head tilted. "What is it?" she asked, setting down the groceries. "Come here, tell me what you see." Nell walked over. At first she saw nothing unusual, just wooden walls, aged and weathered. Then Harlan tapped a section near the floor. "Hear that?" He tapped again. The sound was different, hollow. "The whole wall should sound the same," he said. "But this section doesn't. It's like there's a gap behind it." Nell knelt down, running her fingers along the seam. Could it just be damage, settling? Maybe. Harlan pulled out his pocket knife and carefully worked it into the seam. "But look at this. This isn't random. These boards were cut precisely. This is a panel." He worked the knife along the edge, finding purchase. With a soft click, the panel loosened. Harlan pulled it away, revealing a small cavity in the wall. Inside was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, covered in dust. Nell's heart pounded as Harlan lifted it out. It was heavy, sealed with a combination lock that had long since rusted. "What is this?" she whispered. Harlan carried it to the table. Using a screwdriver, he pried at the lock until it finally gave way with a crack. Inside the box were papers, dozens of them, yellowed with age but still legible. Harlan pulled out the first document. It was a property deed dated 1976, made out to someone named Theodore Whitmore. The property description matched their cabin. "Theodore Whitmore," Nell read over his shoulder. "Who was he?" Harlan shuffled through more papers, bank statements from 1977 and 78 showing deposits and transfers of staggering amounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through accounts in Montana, Wyoming, and Oregon. There were blueprints, too, detailed architectural drawings of the cabin, but they showed more than what existed above ground. Beneath the main structure, the blueprints indicated another level, a basement or vault accessed through what the plans labeled simply as primary entrance. "Harlan," Nell breathed, "there's something under us." He spread the blueprints on the table, studying them by candlelight. According to this, the entrance should be right about... He traced his finger across the paper. "Here, in the main room, under where the rug would be." They both turned to look at the floor. There was no rug, just bare wooden planks worn smooth by time. Harlan grabbed a flashlight and got down on his hands and knees, examining every inch of the floor. Nell watched, her mouth dry, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. "Nell," Harlan said quietly, "shine the light right here." She knelt beside him, directing the beam where he pointed. There, almost invisible in the grain of the wood, was a straight line, and another, forming a square about 3 feet across. Harlan pressed on different spots, testing. Nothing happened. He tried prying at the edges. Still nothing. "There has to be a release mechanism," he muttered, "something that opens it." They searched for an hour, pressing every board, checking every corner. Nell was about to give up when her hand brushed against one of the stones in the fireplace. It shifted slightly under her touch. "Harlan!" He came over as she pushed the stone again. It slid inward with a grinding sound, and from across the room came a soft click. They turned to see the square panel in the floor had risen slightly, maybe half an inch, just enough to get fingers under it. Harlan rushed over and lifted. The panel came up easily, revealing a dark opening and the top of a metal ladder descending into blackness. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the scent of earth and something else. Something metallic. They stared into the darkness for a long moment, neither speaking. "We should wait until morning," Nell said. "Go down in daylight when we can see better." Harlan nodded, but neither of them moved. The opening seemed to pulse with possibility, with danger, with secrets that had waited decades to be discovered. Finally, Harlan lowered the panel back into place. They pushed the stone in the fireplace back to its original position. The panel locked with another soft click. That night, neither of them slept. They lay in their blankets, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Theodore Whitmore and his hidden vault and what might be waiting in the darkness below their feet. The next morning arrived with grey clouds and the promise of rain. Harlan made coffee on the cast-iron stove while Nell gathered every flashlight and candle they had. If they were going down there, they needed to see. "We don't have to do this," Harlan said as they stood over the closed panel. "We could just leave it alone, live our lives up here and pretend we never found it." "Could we?" Nell asked. "Could you really spend every day walking over this and not wonder?" He smiled faintly. "No, I couldn't." Nell pressed the stone. The panel clicked open. Harlan lifted it and shone his flashlight down. The metal ladder looked solid, the rungs clean of rust, another sign that Theodore Whitmore had built things to last. "I'll go first," Harlan said. "We go together," Nell replied firmly. Harlan descended slowly, testing each rung. Nell followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ladder went down about 12 feet before Harlan's boots touched concrete. "I'm down," he called up. "It's solid." Nell climbed down to join him. Harlan swept the flashlight around, and they both gasped. They were standing in a corridor. The walls were smooth concrete, professionally poured. The ceiling was reinforced with steel beams. This wasn't some amateur hideout. This was engineered, planned, built by someone who knew what they were doing and had serious money to spend. The corridor stretched about 20 feet before ending at a heavy metal door. Harlan approached it cautiously. There was a wheel lock, like something from a bank vault, but simpler. He tried turning it. At first, it wouldn't budge, locked in place by decades of disuse. Then, with a groan of metal on metal, it began to move. Nell watched, barely breathing as Harlan spun the wheel. Finally, it stopped. He pulled the door open. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The room beyond the door was small, maybe 10 feet square, and lined floor to ceiling with metal shelves. On those shelves were boxes, dozens of them. Cardboard file boxes, the kind offices use for storage, each one labeled with dates and numbers that meant nothing to Harlan or Nell. But it was what sat on the table in the center of the room that made them freeze. 4 canvas bags, olive green, military style, each one bulging with weight. Harlan set down his flashlight and approached the table like he was approaching a snake. He reached for the nearest bag, pulled open the drawstring, and looked inside. Then he stumbled backward, nearly knocking into Nell. "What?" she asked urgently. "What is it?" Harlan couldn't speak. He just pointed at the bag with a shaking hand. Nell stepped forward and looked inside. Her knees went weak. Cash, stacks and stacks of cash, bound with rubber bands that had long since rotted away. $100 bills, neat and organized, filling the bag completely. With trembling hands, Nell opened the second bag. More cash. The third, the fourth, all full. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Harlan." Harlan had moved to the shelves, pulling down one of the boxes. Inside were more bundles of cash, along with gold coins sealed in plastic sleeves. He opened another box. Bonds. Treasury bonds, dated from the 1970s, each one worth thousands of dollars. Box after box revealed the same. Cash, gold, bonds, even loose diamonds in small velvet pouches. Nell sank to the concrete floor, her mind reeling. Who was he? Who was Theodore Whitmore? Harlan pulled a folder from one of the shelves. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle. He read aloud, his voice shaking. Theodore Whitmore, senior executive at Mountain States Bank, disappeared in August of 1978 amid allegations of massive embezzlement. Authorities estimate Whitmore stole over $300 million through a complex scheme of fake accounts and falsified loans. Despite an extensive manhunt, Whitmore was never found. The money was never recovered. Nell looked up at Harlan, then around at the boxes of cash and gold surrounding them. "This is it," she said hollowly. "This is the money he stole. He built this cabin, hid everything down here, and then he died," Harlan finished. "Or got caught, or ran away and never came back." He sat down on the floor beside her. "And it's been sitting here for 46 years. They sat in silence, the weight of their discovery pressing down like the earth above them. This wasn't treasure in the romantic sense. This was stolen money, blood money maybe. It represented fraud and broken lives and a criminal who had gotten away with everything only to leave it buried and forgotten. "What do we do?" Nell asked quietly. "I don't know." Nell reached into the nearest bag and pulled out a stack of hundreds. The bills were old from the 70s, but still crisp, still legal tender, still worth exactly what they'd always been worth. "We could turn it in," she said, without conviction. "Call the authorities. Tell them we found Theodore Whitmore's stolen fortune." "And then what?" Harlan asked. "They take it all. We get nothing except maybe our names in the paper. We go back to having $42 and nowhere to live." Nell set the money down. "Our children. They said we were a burden. They said we were worthless. They threw us away like garbage." "I know. And now we're sitting on top of a fortune that could change everything." "I know." Nell looked at her husband, really looked at him, at the lines carved deep by worry and work, at the hands scarred from a lifetime of building things for other people, at the eyes that had cried silent tears the night their own children had betrayed them. "We didn't ask for this," she said. "We didn't steal it. Theodore Whitmore did. We're just two old people who bought an abandoned cabin and found something that's been lost for almost 50 years. Harlan met her gaze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe this is why we ended up here. Maybe this is the universe giving us one last chance, not to be rich, but to survive, to prove that we still matter, that our lives still have value." Harlan was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into the bag and pulled out a small stack of bills, about $500. "We take what we need to live," he said slowly. "Nothing extravagant. We fix up the cabin properly. We buy decent food. We make sure we're warm when winter comes. But we don't go crazy. We don't draw attention." "And the rest?" Nell asked. "We figure that out later, when we've had time to think, to really understand what we have here and what it means." Nell nodded slowly. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't even a good solution. But it was the only one that made sense in that moment, in that cold, concrete room surrounded by the ghost of Theodore Whitmore's crimes. They each took a bag of cash and carried it up the ladder. Back in the cabin, in the grey morning light, the money looked different. Less like a miracle and more like a responsibility. Harlan reset the panel in the floor and pushed the stone back into place. The entrance sealed with a click that now sounded ominous rather than mysterious. "We don't tell anyone," Harlan said. "Not Constance, not Ruby May, not anyone. As far as the world knows, we're just two poor old folk scraping by." "Agreed," Nell said. They hid the bags in the back of the closet, buried under blankets and old clothes. Then they went about their day as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. Nell walked to Pinehaven that afternoon for her first shift at the general store. Ruby May showed her how the register worked, where everything was kept, how to help customers who came in looking for specific items. It was simple work, familiar work, and Nell fell into it easily. She smiled at customers, made change, swept the floor, and tried not to think about the fortune hidden beneath her cabin floor. But her mind kept drifting back. to Theodore Whitmore and his schemes, to the people he'd stolen from, to the years that money had sat untouched while the world moved on without it. When her shift ended, Ruby May paid her $32 for the 4 hours. Nell took the money and felt the weight of irony. She had hundreds of thousands of dollars hidden in her cabin, but these $32 felt real, earned, honest. Walking back through the pine forest as the sun set, Nell thought about her children. She wondered if they'd reported her and Harlan missing, if they'd searched at all, or if they'd simply washed their hands of the whole situation and moved on with their comfortable lives. Part of her wanted them to know, wanted to tell them that the parents they'd thrown away had found something valuable, something powerful, wanted to see their faces when they realized what they'd lost. But a deeper part of her knew that was petty, that revealing the money would only bring danger and complications and the kind of attention that could destroy the fragile peace she and Harlan were building. When she got back to the cabin, Harlan had fixed the front door so it closed properly and had patched several holes in the walls. He'd also cooked dinner on the cast-iron stove. Venison stew from meat he'd traded for with a local hunter, vegetables from Constance's garden, bread from the general store. They ate in silence, both lost in thought. Finally, Harlan spoke. "I've been thinking about the ventilation system." Nell looked up. "What about it?" "When I was working on the roof, I noticed something odd. There are vents up there built into the structure, but they don't go where they should. They run down into the walls, through the floor." "To the vault?" "I think so. Theodore built a ventilation system to keep air circulating down there, which means he planned for it to be sealed for a long time, maybe years." Nell set down her spoon. "He was going to hide, wait until the heat died down, then come back and retrieve it. But he never did." They both fell silent again, thinking about a man they'd never met who had shaped their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. That night, Nell had a dream. She was walking through the vault, but instead of money, the shelves were filled with photographs. Pictures of strangers, families, children, people whose lives had been destroyed by Theodore Whitmore's greed. In the dream, they all turned to look at her, their faces hollow and accusing. She woke with a start, her heart racing. Harlan was already awake, sitting at the table, looking at the blueprints by candlelight. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "I keep thinking about what you said, about this being why we ended up here, about the universe giving us a chance. Do you believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," he admitted, "but I know this. We spent 47 years playing by the rules. We worked hard, raised our children right, never asked for handouts. And where did it get us? Thrown away, forgotten." He looked at her, his eyes tired but clear. "Maybe we've earned this, not because we stole it, but because we survived everything else. Maybe this is compensation for a life that took more than it gave." Nell walked over and sat beside him. "Or maybe it's a test, to see if we can handle having something without losing who we are. Can we?" "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'd like to try." Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new normal. Nell worked at the general store 3 days a week, earning honest money that they used for groceries and supplies. Harlan slowly improved the cabin, using cash from the vault sparingly and carefully, never buying anything so expensive that it would raise questions. He fixed the solar panels on the roof and got them working again. Suddenly they had electricity, limited but functional. He installed a water heater connected to the well. He insulated the walls properly so the cold wouldn't kill them when winter arrived. The cabin transformed from a desperate shelter into an actual home. But always, always, they were aware of what lay beneath. The fortune in the darkness. The secret that could save them or destroy them, depending on how they handled it. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Nell pulled out one of the newspaper clippings about Theodore Whitmore. She read it carefully, studying the details she'd missed before. It says here that the embezzlement affected over 200 families, she said quietly. People lost their savings. Businesses went under. Some people lost everything. Harlan stared into the fire. I know. This money, Nell continued, it's not really ours. It belongs to those people, or their families, their children and grandchildren who are probably still dealing with the aftermath. It's been 46 years, Harlan said. The bank probably paid restitution. Insurance covered some of it. Those people have moved on. Have they? Harlan didn't answer. Nell folded the clipping carefully. I'm not saying we give it all back. I'm not even sure how we would. But maybe, eventually, we figure out a way to make this right, to use this money for something good instead of just ourselves. Like what? I don't know yet, she admitted. But Theodore Whitmore used this fortune to run and hide. Maybe we can use it to build something instead. Something that helps people like us, people who got thrown away. Harlan reached for her hand. You're a better person than I am. No, she said softly. I'm just tired of being powerless. For once in my life, I want to have the resources to make a difference, not just for us, but for others who need it. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pine trees. Winter was coming. They could feel it in the air, in the shortened days, in the bite of morning frost. But inside the cabin, with the fire warm and their secret safe, Harlan and Nell felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. They felt hope, because beneath their feet lay not just money, but possibility, the chance to rewrite their ending, the chance to prove that being cast out by family wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. Winter arrived in Montana with teeth. The first snow fell on a Tuesday morning in late October, soft and silent, blanketing the world in white. Harlan stood at the window watching it come down, his coffee steaming in the cold air. They had heat now, electricity, running water. The cabin no longer felt like a desperate gamble. It felt like home, but the vault below them haunted every quiet moment. They'd been living above it for 6 weeks, taking only what they absolutely needed. A few $100s here and there for repairs, for food, for survival. But they hadn't gone back down, hadn't really looked at what they had, hadn't confronted the full scope of Theodore Whitmore's buried fortune. Nell came to stand beside him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. We need to go back down there, she said quietly. I know. We need to see all of it, count it, understand what we're really dealing with. Harlan set down his coffee. I've been avoiding it. Me too. Nell turned to face him. Because once we know exactly what's down there, we have to make a real decision, and that terrifies me. They spent the morning preparing. Harlan gathered flashlights, his toolbox, paper and pencils for making an inventory. Nell made sandwiches and coffee like they were heading out for a picnic instead of descending into a criminal's hidden vault. At noon, with grey light filtering through the windows and snow still falling outside, Harlan pressed the stone in the fireplace. The panel clicked open. They stood looking down into the darkness for a long moment. Together, Nell said. Together, Harlan agreed. They climbed down the metal ladder, their footsteps echoing in the concrete corridor. Harlan spun the wheel lock on the vault door. It opened with a groan that sounded almost reluctant, like the room knew what was coming. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. The 4 canvas bags on the table, the boxes lining the shelves, the weight of decades pressing down. Harlan pulled out his notepad. Let's start with the bags. They opened the first one and began counting. $100 bills organized in stacks. Nell counted while Harlan wrote down the numbers. The first bag contained $247,500. The second bag held $231,000. The third, $253,000. The fourth, $268,000. Nell sat back, her hands shaking. That's nearly $1 million just in these 4 bags. And we haven't touched the boxes yet, Harlan said, his voice hollow. They moved to the shelves. The first box contained more cash, neatly bundled, $50,000. The second box held gold coins, American Eagles mostly, dated from the 1970s. Harlan counted them carefully. 120 coins at roughly $2,000 each in current value. Another $240,000. The third box held treasury bonds. Nell read the denominations aloud while Harlan calculated. 10 bonds at $50,000 each. That's $500,000. Box after box revealed more wealth. Diamonds in velvet pouches, at least 30 carats worth. Rare coins in protective cases. More gold, both coins and small bars. Bearer bonds that could be cashed anonymously. Foreign currency that would need to be exchanged, but was still valuable. They worked for 4 hours, counting and recording, their disbelief growing with each new discovery. Finally, Harlan set down his pencil and looked at the final tally. "According to my math," he said slowly, "there's approximately $2,700,000 in cash, another $3 million in gold, $5 million in bonds. The diamonds are probably worth $500,000, maybe more. The rare coins could be another $1 million to the right collector." Nell's voice was barely a whisper. "That's over $12 million. And we haven't even checked if there are more rooms down here." They looked at each other, the magnitude of it crashing over them like a wave. This wasn't a nest egg. This wasn't a lucky find. This was generational wealth, life-changing, world-altering money. Harlan stood up and walked the perimeter of the vault room, examining the walls more carefully. In the back corner, hidden behind a stack of boxes, he found another door. Smaller than the first, with a simple deadbolt instead of a wheel lock. He slid the bolt back and pulled the door open. The room beyond was larger, maybe 20 feet square, and it was filled with more boxes, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling. "Oh God," Nell breathed. They spent another 3 hours in that second room. More cash, more gold, more bonds. The amounts staggered them. Harlan's hand cramped from writing. Nell's voice grew hoarse from reading numbers aloud. When they finally finished, when they'd opened every box and counted every stack, Harlan looked at his notebook with disbelief. "The newspaper said Theodore Whitmore stole over $300 million, he said slowly. "But the 1970s were 50 years ago. Inflation alone would make that worth over $1 billion in today's money." "How much is here?" Nell asked. Harlan flipped through his pages of calculations. In terms of face value, approximately $28 million in cash, another $30 million in gold at current prices, $40 million in various bonds and securities. The diamonds, rare coins, and other valuables, probably another $15 to $20 million. Conservatively, we're looking at close to $100 million. Nell had to sit down. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "But that's not even a third of what he stole," Harlan continued, "which means either he spent the rest, hid it somewhere else, or someone else found it first." Nell looked around at the concrete walls, the metal shelves, the carefully organized fortunes surrounding them. He built this place to last, spent money he didn't have to make sure it would survive. Why would he only hide part of it here? Maybe he had multiple hideouts, Harlan suggested. Or maybe this was just his emergency fund, the money he needed to disappear and start over. $100 million is one hell of an emergency fund. They sat in silence, surrounded by Theodore Whitmore's legacy. Nell thought about the newspaper article she'd read. 200 families affected, lives destroyed, dreams crushed. And here sat the money that could have saved them, hidden away for almost half a century. "We have to give it back," she said quietly. Harlan looked at her. "To who? The bank doesn't exist anymore. It was absorbed by a larger corporation in the 80s. The people who were hurt are probably dead or scattered across the country. Then we find them, or we find their families. We make this right." "Nell," Harlan's voice was gentle but firm, "even if we could find everyone who was affected, how would we explain where we got the money? We'd have to admit we've been sitting on stolen cash for 2 months. We'd be investigated, probably arrested, definitely stripped of everything. So we just keep it? Nell's voice rose. We just benefit from Theodore Whitmore's crimes and pretend that's okay? I didn't say that. Harlan stood up, pacing. But we also can't martyr ourselves. Our own children threw us away. We were sleeping in a truck, Nell. We had $347 to our names. Now we have a chance to actually live, not just survive. Nell stood too, facing him. At what cost? Our souls? Our integrity? We spent our whole lives being good people, Harlan. Honest people. And the world rewarded us by taking everything. Now we have a chance to be dishonest. And suddenly things are looking up. What does that say? It says the world is complicated, Harlan shot back. It says good people sometimes have to make hard choices. It says maybe, just maybe, we deserve something good after everything we've been through. Do we deserve it more than the people Theodore Whitmore stole from? Harlan didn't answer. He couldn't. They stood in that cold concrete room, the weight of $100 million pressing down on them like the earth above. The moral calculus was impossible. Every answer felt wrong. Keeping it felt wrong. Giving it up felt wrong. There was no clean choice, no clear path. Finally, Nell spoke, her voice softer. I'm not saying we give all of it back. I'm not even sure we could. But we can't just keep it all and pretend we're still the people we thought we were. Harlan ran his hand through his thinning hair. What are you proposing? I don't know yet, she admitted. But we need to think about this carefully. We need to understand what we have, what it means, and what we're willing to become to keep it. They climbed back up the ladder as the afternoon light faded. The cabin felt different now, warmer, but also heavier. The secret below them had grown from a mystery to a burden that neither of them could carry alone. That night, they lay in bed, unable to sleep. The wind howled outside, piling snow against the windows. Inside, the fire crackled, but the warmth couldn't reach the cold place in Nell's chest. I keep thinking about our children, she said into the darkness, about how they looked at us like we were nothing. Like we had no value because we didn't have money. I know. And now we have more money than they'll probably ever see in their lives, and they have no idea. Harlan rolled over to face her. Does that make you feel better or worse? Nell thought about it. Both. It makes me feel powerful and petty at the same time. I want them to know. I want to see their faces, but I also never want them to find out because the money would be the only reason they'd come back. They're not coming back either way, Harlan said quietly. Money or no money, we're dead to them. They've moved on. The words hurt, but they were true. Nell had thought about calling them a dozen times, wanted to hear Evelyn's voice. Even Garrett's coldness would be better than this silence. But she knew Harlan was right. Their children had made their choice. The phone lines worked both ways, and not one of them had called to check if their parents were even alive. Maybe that's why this money found us, Nell said. Not as a test or a reward, but as a consolation prize. The universe saying, your family abandoned you, but here's something to fill the hole they left. Can money fill that hole? No, she said, but it can keep us warm while we figure out how to live with it. The next morning dawned clear and cold. The world outside was blanketed in white, pristine and untouched. Harlan made coffee while Nell sat at the table, staring at the floor where the hidden panel lay beneath their feet. I have an idea, she said, as Harlan set a mug in front of her. But you're going to think I'm crazy. I already think you're crazy, he said with a small smile. I married you, didn't I? Nell smiled back, but it faded quickly. What if we use the money to help people like us? People who've been cast aside by their families, seniors with nowhere to go. We could buy property, create a place where people can live with dignity. Harlan sat down slowly. You want to start a home for abandoned elderly people? Not a home. Homes feel institutional. I'm talking about real housing, small cabins or cottages, a community where people can have privacy and independence but also support, where nobody gets thrown away just because they got old. Harlan was quiet, thinking. That would cost millions. We have millions. It would draw attention, questions about where the money came from. We'd have to be smart about it, Nell agreed. Do it slowly, through lawyers and corporations. Make it look legitimate. And what do we live on while we're doing this? We can't exactly explain how two poor seniors suddenly have the resources to develop property. Nell had thought about this. We take enough to live comfortably. Fix this place up properly. Make sure we're secure. Maybe $1 million or $2 million for ourselves. The rest goes into the project. Harlan laughed, but there was no humor in it. $1 million or $2 million for ourselves. Listen to us. 2 months ago we were counting pennies. 2 months ago we were sleeping in a truck, Nell reminded him. Now we're sitting on a fortune that could actually make a difference, not just for us, but for people who need it. People like the ones Theodore Whitmore stole from in the first place. Yes, Nell said firmly, exactly like them. We can't give the money back to the original victims, but we can use it to make sure what happened to them, what happened to us, doesn't keep happening to others. Harlan stared into his coffee for a long time. Nell watched emotions play across his face. Doubt, fear, hope, resignation. Finally, he looked up. It's a beautiful idea, he said. But beautiful ideas don't always survive contact with reality. The legal complications alone could destroy us. If anyone discovers that money came from Theodore Whitmore's theft, everything we build could be seized. We could go to prison. So we're careful, Nell said. We move slowly. We get help from people we trust. We don't trust anyone, Harlan pointed out. Our own children betrayed us. Why would strangers be any different? Because strangers don't have a history of breaking our hearts, Nell replied. And because some people are genuinely good. Ruby May gave me a job without knowing me. Constance told us about this cabin. There's kindness in this world, Harlan. We've just been looking at the wrong people for it. Harlan rubbed his face with both hands. Let's say we do this. Let's say we figure out a way to launder Theodore Whitmore's stolen millions into some kind of legitimate charitable foundation. How do we live with ourselves? We'd still be benefiting from his crimes. We'd be undoing them, Nell countered. Theodore Whitmore stole that money for himself, to run away, to live a life of luxury while people suffered. We'd be using it to help people, to build something good from something terrible. Isn't that a kind of justice? It's a kind of something, Harlan said. I'm just not sure what. They spent the day in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Harlan worked on winterizing the cabin, sealing drafts, checking the heating system. Nell walked into Pinehaven for her shift at the general store, but her mind was elsewhere. Ruby May noticed. You seem distracted today, honey. Nell forced a smile, just thinking about winter, wondering if we're prepared. You've got Harlan, Ruby May said warmly. That man could survive anything, and so could you. You're tougher than you look. The words stuck with Nell as she walked home through the snow. Tougher than you look. Was she? Was she tough enough to make the choices that needed making? Tough enough to carry the weight of Theodore Whitmore's crimes and somehow transform them into something good? When she got back to the cabin, Harlan was sitting at the table with papers spread everywhere. Bank documents, legal forms, notebooks filled with calculations. What are you doing? She asked. Research, he said without looking up. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. I've been thinking about shell corporations, charitable trusts, property law. There are ways to move money without drawing attention. It's complicated, but possible. Nell set down her bag. You're serious? You want to try this? Harlan finally looked at her. I don't know if I want to, but I think we should. You were right yesterday. We can't just sit on this money and pretend we're good people, and we can't give it back in any meaningful way. So maybe we try to do something good with it, Something that would make all of this worth it. Nell felt tears prick her eyes. We could fail. Probably will, Harlan agreed. But we might also succeed. And wouldn't that be something? Two cast-off seniors building a community for others like them, funded by stolen money, turned righteous. It's either poetic justice or the worst idea we've ever had. Maybe both, Nell said, sitting down beside him. They worked into the night, planning, scheming, dreaming. Harlan drew up rough blueprints for a small community of cabins. Nell made lists of what they'd need: lawyers, accountants, contractors they could trust. The project took shape on paper, impossible and beautiful. Around midnight, Nell pushed back from the table. We're really doing this? I think we are. We could lose everything. End up in prison. Die broke and alone. We could, Harlan acknowledged. Or we could build something that outlasts us. Something that means our lives mattered. That we didn't just survive, we fought back against a world that tried to throw us away. Nell looked at him, really looked at him. 72 years old, scarred hands, tired eyes, but something burning inside that hadn't been there before. Purpose, hope, the fierce determination of someone who'd been knocked down and was getting back up swinging. I love you, she said. I love you too. They went to bed that night with the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't perfect. It probably wasn't even legal, but it was theirs, and it was something worth fighting for. The next morning, Nell woke to find Harlan already up, staring out the window at the snow-covered forest. I want to go back down, he said. One more time. I need to see it all again. Make sure this is real. They descended into the vault together, moving through the rooms they'd catalogued days before. But this time, Harlan was looking for something specific. In the second room, he found it. A metal filing cabinet they'd overlooked during their initial inventory. Inside were Theodore Whitmore's personal records. Not just bank statements, but letters, journals, photographs. Harlan pulled out a leather-bound journal and opened it to the first page. Theodore's handwriting was neat, precise, the writing of a man who planned everything. January 3rd, 1976, Harlan read aloud, begun the acquisition phase. Marcus suspects nothing. The offshore accounts are functioning as planned. By year's end, I'll have enough to disappear completely. He flipped through the pages, Nell reading over his shoulder. The journal detailed Theodore's embezzlement scheme step by step. Fake loan applications, falsified documents, money siphoned off in amounts small enough not to trigger immediate audits. But what struck them were the entries from later, after Theodore had already stolen millions. September 12, 1977. The weight of what I've done settles heavier each day. I see the faces of people I've hurt in my dreams. The Jenkins family, their hardware store closing. The Martinez family, their daughter's college fund gone. I tell myself I had no choice, that the bank was corrupt and I was owed this, but the lies taste bitter. Nell's hand shook as she turned the page. November 2nd, 1977. Built the vault today. Construction crew thinks it's a wine cellar. They have no idea what it will hold. I'm building a prison for myself as much as a hideout. Every dollar I bury is a reminder of what I've become. Harlan continued reading, his voice growing quieter. June 8th, 1978. The audit is coming. I have perhaps 2 weeks before they discover the full scope. The cabin is ready. The money is hidden. I should feel relieved. Instead, I feel nothing but shame. The final entry was dated July 22nd, 1978. The news is reporting my disappearance. They're calling me a monster, a thief, a destroyer of families. They're right. I built this vault, filled it with money I stole from innocent people, and now I sit above it, unable to enjoy a penny. This was supposed to be freedom. Instead, it's a tomb. I think about turning myself in, confessing everything. But I'm too much of a coward. So I'll stay here, in this cabin I built with stolen money, and I'll wait. For what, I don't know. Maybe for justice to find me. Maybe for the courage to make this right. I don't think either is coming." There were no more entries after that. Nell and Harlan sat in silence, the journal resting between them. Finally, Harlan spoke. "He never left. He stayed here and he died here, trapped by his own crimes. And now we have everything he stole," Nell said. "Everything he couldn't bring himself to use." Harlan looked around the vault with new eyes. It wasn't just a room full of money anymore. It was Theodore Whitmore's confession. His guilt made physical, his punishment self-imposed. "He wanted to make it right," Nell said slowly. "He just didn't know how." "Maybe we can finish what he started," Harlan replied. "Use his stolen fortune the way he wished he could have. Give it back to the world he took it from." They climbed back up to the cabin carrying Theodore's journal. Nell placed it on the table next to Harlan's plans for the community. "We're not just keeping stolen money," she said. "We're completing a dead man's redemption, taking his crime and transforming it into something good." "That's one way to look at it," Harlan said. "It's the only way I can live with this," Nell replied. "Theodore Whitmore spent the last months of his life drowning in guilt. We can use that guilt to build something he never could, a place where people matter more than money, where getting old doesn't mean getting thrown away." Harlan pulled her close. "It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing is." They spent the next week refining their plan. Harlan contacted a lawyer in Billings, someone far enough away that they wouldn't be connected to Pinehaven. He explained that he and his wife had come into a modest inheritance and wanted to establish a small charitable foundation. The lawyer, a woman named Janet Keller, was skeptical but intrigued. "What kind of foundation?" "Housing for seniors," Harlan explained, "particularly those who've been abandoned by family or are at risk of homelessness. We want to create a community where people can live independently but with support." Janet asked questions. Harlan answered carefully, sticking to the story they'd crafted. The inheritance was from a distant relative, modest but enough to get started. They'd build slowly, carefully, making sure everything was done properly. "I'll need documentation," Janet said. "Proof of funds, tax returns, identification." "Of course," Harlan replied, his heart pounding. This was where their plan could fall apart. But Nell had thought of this. They'd found among Theodore's papers a set of documents for a shell corporation he'd never used. With some careful alterations and the help of the internet at the Pinehaven Library, they'd created a paper trail that looked legitimate enough to pass initial scrutiny. Janet reviewed their documents and nodded slowly. "This looks straightforward enough. I can help you set up a charitable trust. It'll take a few months to process, but it's doable." They left her office with the first step complete. It felt surreal, using Theodore Whitmore's own escape plan against his crimes. The shell corporation that was supposed to help him disappear was now going to help them build something good. Back at the cabin, Nell stood at the window watching snowfall. "We're really doing this," she said, not quite believing it. "We are," Harlan confirmed. "Our children will never know." "Does that bother you?" Nell thought about it. "No, this isn't for them. This isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about making sure what happened to us doesn't keep happening to others." Harlan joined her at the window. "Do you think Theodore is watching somehow, seeing what we're doing with his money?" "I don't know if I believe in that stuff," Nell said. "But if he is, I hope he finds some peace knowing his crimes are being undone." They stood together as darkness fell and the snow continued to fall, two old people with a secret that could destroy them or redeem them. They didn't know which it would be, but for the first time since their children had cast them out, they had something more valuable than money. They had purpose. Spring arrived in Montana like a promise kept. The snow melted slowly, revealing green beneath, and the cabin that had sheltered Harlan and Nell through their darkest winter now stood as proof they'd survived. More than survived. They'd found something worth fighting for. Janet Keller called on a Tuesday morning in late March. "Your paperwork is approved," she said. "The Whitmore Memorial Charitable Trust is officially established." Harlan had to sit down. They'd named it after Theodore, a small acknowledgement of where the money came from and what it was meant to undo. Nell stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, as Janet explained the details. "You're authorized to begin acquiring property and distributing funds according to the Trust's mission statement," Janet continued. "I have to say, in 20 years of law practice, I've never seen anyone do something quite like this." "Like what?" Harlan asked carefully. "Give away their entire inheritance to help strangers," Janet said. "Most people would keep it. Buy a bigger house, travel, spoil their grandchildren. But you two are building something for people you've never met. It's remarkable." After the call ended, Harlan and Nell sat in silence for a long moment. Then Nell started to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief, so overwhelming it had nowhere else to go. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Harlan pulled her close. "We did the first part. Now comes the hard part, making it real." Over the next 6 months, they worked harder than they'd worked in their entire lives. Harlan traveled to Billings twice a week, meeting with architects and contractors, reviewing property listings, negotiating purchases. Nell managed the paperwork, tracking every dollar, making sure everything was documented and legitimate. They found land 20 miles from Pine Haven, 60 acres of pine forest with a creek running through it. The property had belonged to a logging company that went bankrupt in the 90s. It was cheap, isolated, and perfect. Harlan hired a local contractor named Malcolm Reeves to begin clearing and grading. Malcolm was in his 50s, quiet and competent, with a crew of 4 men who asked no questions and did solid work. "What exactly are we building here?" Malcolm asked, reviewing the blueprints Harlan had drawn up. "A community," Harlan replied. 12 small cabins, each 1 bedroom with a bathroom and kitchenette. A central community building with a dining hall, library, and medical clinic. Solar panels for power, wells for water. Everything self-sufficient. Malcolm whistled. "That's ambitious and expensive." "We have the funds. Must have been some inheritance." Harlan met his eyes. It was. Construction began in May. Harlan was on site every day, working alongside Malcolm's crew despite his 73 years. His back ached and his hands cramped, but the work felt good, purposeful. Every nail he drove was an act of defiance against his children who'd called him useless. Every beam he raised was proof that he still mattered. Nell divided her time between the general store and managing supplies for the construction. Ruby May had noticed the uptick in her spirits. "You seem different lately," Ruby May observed one afternoon. "Lighter somehow." Nell smiled. "Harlan and I are working on a project, something meaningful. Anything I can help with?" Nell hesitated. They'd been so careful to keep everything secret, but Ruby May had shown them nothing but kindness, and they'd need help eventually. People to spread the word about the community they were building. "Not yet," Nell said, "but soon. When we're ready, I promise you'll be one of the first to know." By August, the first 4 cabins were complete, small but beautiful, with wide windows and covered porches. Harlan walked through each one, checking every detail. Solid floors, good insulation, functional plumbing. These weren't temporary shelters. These were homes. Nell joined him in the first completed cabin, standing in the center of the main room. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The air smelled like fresh pine and new beginnings. "Theodore Whitmore would be proud," she said softly. "Or horrified that we're spending his getaway money on other people," Harlan replied. "No," Nell shook her head. "I've been reading his journal again, really reading it. He hated what he'd become, hated that he couldn't undo what he'd done. This is what he wanted. He just didn't have the courage to make it happen." Harlan took her hand. "We're giving him that courage, 50 years too late, but still." They decided to call the community Whitmore Haven another nod to Theodore's complicated legacy. The name felt right, a haven built from shame transformed into grace. In September, Janet Keller helped them draft criteria for residents. They'd accept anyone over 60 who had been abandoned by family, faced homelessness, or simply had nowhere else to go. No cost to live there, no rent, no fees. The trust would cover everything: utilities, food, medical care. "You're going to have more applicants than you can handle," Janet warned. "There are thousands of seniors in this situation." "We'll start small," Harlan said. 12 cabins means 12 residents. We'll prove the concept works, then maybe expand." "And how will you find these people?" Janet asked. Nell had thought about this. "Through churches, senior centers, social workers, people who work with vulnerable populations, we'll let them know there's a place where forgotten people can find dignity." "You're good people," Janet said quietly. "The world needs more like you." If only she knew, Nell thought. If only she knew where the money really came from and the guilt that drove every decision they made. Word began to spread in October, not through advertising, but through whispers. A pastor in Butte mentioned Whitmore Haven to a woman whose mother had been evicted. A social worker in Missoula told a client about the community. Constance, who'd been let in on the secret, spread the word carefully among people she trusted. Applications arrived slowly at first, then in a steady stream. Elderly people with nowhere to go, seniors abandoned by children who couldn't or wouldn't care for them, people who'd worked their whole lives only to find themselves alone and scared at the end. Nell read every application, tears streaming down her face. Each one was a story of betrayal and loss that echoed their own. Each one deserved help. They selected the first 12 residents carefully. A 71-year-old woman named Dorothy, whose daughter had put her in a nursing home and never visited. An 80-year-old veteran named Frank, who'd been sleeping in his car for 8 months. A widow named Iris, whose son had stolen her Social Security checks and left her destitute. One by one, they arrived at Whitmore Haven. Harlan and Nell greeted each person personally, showed them to their cabins, helped them settle in. Watched as disbelief turned to tears, turned to something like joy. Dorothy stood in her cabin doorway, taking in the sight of her own space, her own home for the first time in 5 years. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Nell took her hand. "Because someone should have done it for you already, and because we know what it feels like to be thrown away." By Thanksgiving, all 12 cabins were occupied. The community building was complete, its dining hall filled with people who'd been strangers weeks before but were becoming family. Harlan and Nell hosted Thanksgiving dinner, cooking turkey and all the fixings for their new community. They sat at a long table surrounded by people society had forgotten, and Nell felt something shift inside her. The hole her children had left wasn't gone. It would never be gone. But it was filled with something different now. Purpose, belonging, the knowledge that their lives meant something beyond blood and biology. Frank the veteran raised his glass of apple cider. "I want to make a toast," he said, his voice shaking. 6 months ago, I wanted to die. I saw no point in going on. Then I heard about this place, about 2 people who decided that old folks like us still matter. Harlan, Nell, you saved my life. You saved all our lives. We're not just grateful. We're family now." Glasses clinked around the table. Nell couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. Harlan squeezed her hand under the table. This was what Theodore Whitmore's money was meant for. Not yachts or mansions or escape. This, feeding people, giving them homes, showing them they still had value. Winter came again, their second in Montana, but this time they weren't alone. Whitmore Haven buzzed with life. The residents helped each other, shared meals, played cards, told stories. The community building had a library now, stocked with donated books. A visiting nurse came twice a week to check on everyone. Nell continued working at the general store, but now she had help. Iris had been a bookkeeper before her son destroyed her life, and she took over managing the trust's finances with meticulous care. Dorothy taught cooking classes in the community kitchen. Frank organized a woodworking shop where residents could build and create. The community wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. In January, nearly a year after they'd discovered Theodore Whitmore's vault, a young reporter from the Billings Gazette showed up at Whitmore Haven. Her name was Maya Torres, and she'd heard rumors about the unusual community. "I'd like to write a story," she told Harlan, "about what you've built here." Harlan's stomach dropped. Publicity was the last thing they needed. Questions about funding could unravel everything. "We're private people," he said carefully. "We'd prefer to stay out of the news." "I understand," Maya said. "But stories like this need to be told. There's an epidemic of elder abandonment in this country. Families throwing away their parents because it's inconvenient to care for them. What you've done here proves there's another way." Nell joined them, having overheard the conversation. "If we agree to an interview, would you keep the focus on the residents? Their stories matter more than ours." Maya nodded. "Absolutely. Though people will be curious about the benefactors. The trust documents show you've poured millions into this project. That's not typical for people of modest means." "We had help," Nell said, which was technically true. Theodore Whitmore's stolen millions had helped, and we had a mission. Sometimes that's all you need. The article ran in February. "Whitmore Haven, where forgotten seniors find family," read the headline. Maya had kept her word, focusing primarily on the residents. Dorothy, Frank, and Iris all told their stories of abandonment and redemption. Harlan and Nell were mentioned briefly as the founders, a retired couple who prefer to let their work speak for itself. The article went viral. Within days, it was picked up by the Associated Press, then national news outlets. Suddenly, Whitmore Haven was everywhere. On morning shows, in newspapers, across social media. And in a suburb outside Portland, Oregon, a woman named Margot was scrolling through Facebook when she saw the article. She clicked on it absently, then froze. The photograph showed an elderly couple standing in front of a row of cabins. The man had his arm around the woman. They were smiling, but there was something familiar about their faces, about the way they stood together. Margot zoomed in on the photo. Her coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the kitchen floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's Mom and Dad." Within hours, all 4 children had seen the article. Garrett called a family meeting. They gathered at his house, the same place they'd decided to force their parents into assisted living 18 months earlier. "They're alive," Ruby said, her voice hollow. "We thought they just disappeared. Took off somewhere to spite us. But they've been in Montana this whole time building some kind of compound for old people." "Not a compound," Owen corrected, scrolling through his phone. "A charitable community. According to this, it's worth at least $15 million. They've housed dozens of seniors. There are plans to expand to more locations." Garrett's face was red. "Where did they get $15 million? They were broke. We were paying their bills." "Apparently not as broke as we thought," Margot said quietly. Owen found another article. This one included more details about the Whitmore Memorial Charitable Trust, about property acquisitions, about the sophisticated legal structure behind it all. "This level of organization," Owen said slowly, "this isn't something you throw together with a modest inheritance. Something else is going on here." "We need to talk to them," Ruby said. "They clearly don't want to talk to us," Margot pointed out. "They've been less than 200 miles away for over a year and never once reached out." "Because we told them to leave," Ruby's voice cracked. "We told them they were a burden. We were selling their house out from under them. Why would they reach out?" Garrett stood up, pacing. "This is about more than hurt feelings. If they've come into money somehow, we have a right to know. We're their children." "Are we?" Ruby asked bitterly. "We acted like we weren't." We treated them like garbage. And now they're out there changing lives while we're sitting here trying to figure out how to get a piece of whatever they found. That's not fair, Garrett snapped. Isn't it? Ruby stood up too. Be honest, Garrett. You see that article and all you can think about is money. Not that our parents are alive and well, not that they're doing something incredible, just that they somehow have resources we didn't know about and we want our share. The room fell silent. Owen shifted uncomfortably. Margot stared at her hands. Finally, Garrett spoke. We should visit them, at least meet them face to face, hear their side of things. And then what? Ruby asked. Apologize? Pretend we're a family again? Take them to court if they don't let us back in? I don't know, Garrett admitted, but we can't just do nothing. They decided to drive to Montana the following week. All 4 children leaving their own families behind, making the trip to Whitmore Haven to confront the parents they'd cast out. Harlan was checking the plumbing in cabin 7 when Constance rushed over, breathless. You have visitors, she said. 4 people in 2 cars just pulled up to the community building. Harlan, they look like your children. Harlan felt his heart drop into his stomach. He'd known this day might come. After the article, after the publicity, it was only a matter of time. But knowing something and facing it were different things. Where's Nell? In the office. I'll get her. Harlan walked slowly toward the community building. Through the windows, he could see them. Garrett in his polo shirt and khakis, Margot with her perfect hair, Owen in expensive jeans and designer sneakers, Ruby standing apart from the others, arms crossed, looking uncertain. His children, the people he'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, the people who'd thrown him away. Nell joined him, taking his hand. Her palm was sweaty. They stood outside the building for a moment, gathering courage. We don't have to do this, she said. We could ask them to leave. They'd just come back, Harlan replied. Or worse, they'd start digging, asking questions about the money. Then we face them. Together. They walked into the building hand in hand. Their 4 children turned as one. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Harlan studied their faces, looking for remorse, for love, for anything that resembled the family they'd once been. Garrett spoke first. So it's true. You've been here all along. Yes, Harlan said simply. You let us think you were dead, Margot accused. Do you have any idea what we went through? Nell's voice was cold. Do you have any idea what we went through? You gave us 48 hours to pack our lives and disappear. You were selling our home. You called us burdens. What exactly did you expect us to do? We expected you to go to Pine Meadows like we arranged, Garrett said, not run away like children and build some kind of cult in the woods. It's not a cult, Harlan's voice rose. It's a community, for people whose families abandoned them, people exactly like us. Owen stepped forward. Look, we came here to talk, not to fight. We've all had time to cool down. Maybe we can work past what happened. Work past it? Nell laughed bitterly. You want to work past the fact that you erased us from your lives? Tried to warehouse us in a facility so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about forgetting we existed? That's not fair, Ruby said quietly. We were trying to help. You were trying to make yourselves feel better, Harlan corrected. Helping us would have meant listening, would have meant treating us like human beings instead of problems to solve. Garrett changed tactics. We read about the trust, about the money you've invested in this place. We have questions about where that came from. There it was. The real reason they'd come. Not to apologize or reconnect, but to investigate. To make sure they weren't missing out on something that should have been theirs. Nell stepped forward, her voice shaking with fury. Of course you do, because that's what matters, isn't it? Not that your parents survived, not that we found a way to turn our pain into something meaningful, just money, always money. We have a right to know, Garrett insisted. If you came into an inheritance or some kind of windfall as your children— Stop, Harlan's voice cracked like a whip. You lost the right to call yourselves our children the day you told us we had 48 hours to disappear. Children don't throw their parents away. Children don't treat people who loved them like inconvenient furniture. Margot's eyes filled with tears. Dad, we made mistakes, but we're still your family. Are you? Harlan asked. Because family doesn't show up after 18 months of silence demanding explanations about money. Family doesn't look at someone's life work and see only dollar signs. We want to make amends, Owen said. We want to be part of your lives again. Nell shook her head slowly. No, you want to be part of whatever financial situation you think we have. If we were still broke, if we were still living in that cabin with nothing, would you be here? Would you care? Silence answered her question. Ruby started crying. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I've missed you every single day. Nell's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. Then you should have called. You should have come looking for us. Instead, you saw us on the news and came running. That's not love, Ruby. That's guilt mixed with greed. What do you want from us? Garrett demanded. You want us to grovel? To beg forgiveness? Fine. We're sorry. We handled things badly. But you're our parents. You can't just cut us out. We didn't cut you out, Harlan said quietly. You cut us loose. We just learned to live without you. He gestured around the community building. Through the windows they could see residents moving between cabins, sitting on porches, tending the communal garden that Nell had started. These people, Harlan continued, they were all abandoned by their families, just like us. And you know what we learned? That blood doesn't make you family. Love does. Commitment does. Showing up does. And none of you have shown up for us in any way that mattered for a very long time. So that's it? Owen asked. You're choosing strangers over your own children? We're choosing people who see our value, Nell replied. People who appreciate what we have to offer beyond money or convenience. Our children, our real children now, are the ones living in those cabins. The ones who say thank you for every meal. The ones who tell us they're grateful we exist. When's the last time any of you said that? Margot looked stricken. Owen stared at the floor. Ruby wiped tears from her face. Garrett's jaw clenched and unclenched. We should go, Garrett said finally. Clearly this was a mistake. Wait, Ruby stepped forward. Please, can't we at least try? I know we failed you. I know we did everything wrong. But you're still my parents. I still love you. Nell's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. Then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Not by demanding to be part of our lives, but by building something worth being part of. Go home, Ruby. Live your life. And if you truly want us back, show us over time that you understand what family really means. And if we do, Ruby asked, if we prove ourselves, will you let us back in? Harlan and Nell exchanged a long look. So much passed between them in that glance. Pain, doubt, hope, fear. Maybe, Harlan said finally, someday, but not today. Today we need you to leave. We have work to do. People who need us, people we won't let down. One by one their children walked out. Ruby lingered longest, looking back like she wanted to say something more. But Nell shook her head gently, and Ruby finally left. When they were alone, Harlan and Nell stood in the empty community building, holding each other while 18 months of grief and anger and relief washed over them. Did we do the right thing? Nell asked. I don't know, Harlan admitted. But it felt right. It felt like standing up for ourselves instead of letting them make us feel small again. They might never come back. I know. We might die without ever reconciling. I know that too. Harlan pulled back to look at her. But Nell, we built something real here. Something that matters. And if we let them back in just because they're our blood, if we let them take that away or taint it with their resentment and greed, then what was the point of any of this? Nell nodded slowly. She understood. Theodore Whitmore's money had given them a chance to redefine family, to build something based on choice and commitment rather than obligation and guilt. Letting their biological children back in before they'd truly changed would be betraying everyone at Whitmore Haven who'd found a home here. Frank found them a few minutes later, sitting at one of the dining tables, lost in thought. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Constance said you had visitors." "Our children," Nell said. "They found us." Frank sat down across from them. "And?" "And we sent them away," Harlan replied. Frank nodded slowly. "My son hasn't called me in 6 years. Didn't even know I was homeless. Probably still doesn't know I'm alive. Part of me hopes he finds out someday, hopes he feels guilty. But another part of me is glad he's not here. Because this place, what you've built, it's pure. It's not complicated by old wounds and expectations. It's just good people helping each other." "That's what we want to protect," Nell said. "That purity." "Then you did the right thing," Frank assured them. "Family isn't who shares your blood, it's who shares your life. And you've shared your life with us, made us matter again. That's family." Over the next year, Whitmore Haven continued to grow. They expanded to 18 cabins, then 24. The trust had money to spare, thanks to Theodore Whitmore's massive theft turned into ongoing good works. They added a proper medical clinic staffed by a retired nurse named Helen. They built a greenhouse so residents could garden year-round. They created a scholarship fund for grandchildren of residents who wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it. The model worked so well that they began receiving requests from other communities. Could they replicate Whitmore Haven in other states? Could the trust support similar projects elsewhere? Harlan and Nell talked about it for weeks. Finally, they decided yes. They'd use Theodore's money to fund 10 more communities across the country. Places where forgotten seniors could find dignity and purpose. They traveled to Montana, Oregon, Colorado, Texas, helping other charitable organizations set up similar programs. Everywhere they went, they met people who'd been abandoned, cast aside, told they had no value. And everywhere they went, they saw those same people transform. Saw them laugh again, dream again, matter again. Ruby called once, about 8 months after the confrontation at Whitmore Haven. She didn't ask for anything, just said she was working on herself, going to therapy, trying to understand how she'd let fear and financial stress turn her into someone who could hurt her own parents. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying to be better, to be the daughter you deserved all along." Nell thanked her for calling and told her to keep trying. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. A door not closed, just held firmly in place until Ruby proved she could walk through it without bringing pain. Garrett, Margot, and Owen never called. Nell sometimes wondered about them, about their lives and their own children. But the wondering didn't hurt as much anymore. She'd learned that you could love someone and still not let them into your life. That boundaries weren't betrayal, that choosing yourself wasn't selfish. 3 years after discovering Theodore Whitmore's vault, Harlan and Nell stood at the entrance to Whitmore Haven, watching the sun set over the mountains. 64 seniors now called this place home. The community hummed with life, laughter, and purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" Nell asked. "Keeping the money instead of turning it in?" Harlan thought about it carefully. "I regret that it was stolen in the first place. I regret that people suffered because of Theodore Whitmore's greed. But do I regret using it to build this? No. We've helped hundreds of people, given them homes, dignity, hope. That counts for something." "Theodore wanted redemption," Nell said. "In his journal, that last entry, he was looking for the courage to make things right." "We gave him that courage," Harlan replied. 50 years too late, but still. His money isn't sitting in a vault anymore, it's building lives. That's the best kind of redemption. Nell leaned against him, watching residents gather for dinner. Dorothy was teaching a cooking class. Frank was in the woodshop with 3 other men, building shelves for the new library. Iris sat on her porch reading, her cat curled in her lap. These were their children now, not by blood, but by choice, and they'd never throw them away. "We should go in," Harlan said. "Help with dinner." "In a minute," Nell replied. "I want to stand here a little longer, remember what it felt like when we had nothing. To appreciate what we have now. To never forget why we did this," Nell corrected. "We were invisible, Harlan, forgotten, and we found a way to make ourselves matter again, to make others matter. That's our legacy, not the money, but the meaning we gave it." They walked inside together, into warmth and noise and the beautiful chaos of community. Behind them, the Montana sky deepened to purple, stars beginning to appear like promises kept. Somewhere far below, in a concrete vault that would remain sealed forever, Theodore Whitmore's confession gathered dust. But above ground, in the cabins and hearts of hundreds of people who'd been told they didn't matter anymore, his money had finally found its purpose. Not as an escape, but as a foundation. Not as stolen wealth, but as transformed grace. And 2 elderly people who'd been cast out by their own family had learned the most important lesson of all, that your worth isn't determined by who claims you, but by what you do with the life you're given. That sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. That redemption is possible even from the darkest crimes if someone has the courage to transform pain into purpose. Harlan and Nell had found that courage in a half-buried cabin, in a vault full of guilt and gold, and in each other. They'd taken Theodore Whitmore's shame and turned it into something beautiful. They'd taken their children's rejection and transformed it into acceptance for hundreds of others. They'd been told they were too old, too poor, too useless to matter. They'd proven everyone wrong. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to turn their pain into purpose. Because the greatest revenge against those who throw you away isn't anger or bitterness. It's building something so meaningful, so full of love and life, that it proves you were always worthy of being kept. As the evening stars filled the Montana sky, Harlan and Nell Monroe stood in their community of forgotten souls, made whole again. They weren't bitter about the past. They weren't waiting for children who might never return. They were simply present, purposeful, and finally free. Because for Harlan and Nell and everyone they'd lifted up from darkness, the end wasn't really an ending at all. It was the moment everything truly began. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering what happens when hope meets courage. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that forgotten dreams still deserve to soar and that second chances can come from the most unexpected places.